I used to have hands that could steady a steel beam in a high-wind storm. I spent 40 years as a structural engineer, calculating load-bearing capacities and stress fractures, building bridges that connected cities and skyscrapers that defied gravity. I understood how things held together, and more importantly, I understood exactly how they fell apart. But as I sat on the crinkling paper of the examination table in Dr. Vance's clinic, staring at my own hands, I couldn't stop them from trembling. They looked like withered leaves in a gale, pale and useless. For 6 months, I had been disintegrating. It felt like a slow erosion, the kind that eats away at a cliffside until the house on top just slides into the sea. My vision would blur without warning, turning the world into a smear of gray watercolors. My stomach churns constantly, a cement mixer filled with gravel and acid, and my legs, which once hiked the Cascades, felt like they were filled with wet sand. "You're doing great, Artie," Martha said, patting my knee. I looked at her. Martha, my wife of 40 years. She was the picture of devoted concern, her brow furrowed just enough to show worry, but not enough to cause wrinkles. She was holding my hand, her thumb rubbing over my knuckles in a rhythm that used to soothe me. Now, it just felt like friction. She turned her attention to Dr. Vance, her voice pitching up into that sweet, concerned soprano she used whenever we were in public. She asked, leaning forward, the heavy scent of her floral perfume filling the small, sterile room. "I've been trying to get him to eat more spinach, but he's just so stubborn. Or maybe it's a vitamin D deficiency." She looked exactly like the woman I married in 1984, but her touch felt different lately. It was cold. There was a calculation to it, like she was checking the ripeness of a fruit she intended to peel. Dr. Vance, a man I've known for 2 decades, didn't answer her immediately. He was staring at the computer screen, his jaw set tight. He was usually a jovial man, quick with a joke about my cholesterol or a story about his grandkids. But today, the air around him was heavy. He typed something, hit enter, and then swiveled his chair around. He didn't look at me. He looked at Martha. "Mrs. Penhaligon," he said, his voice flat, "we need to update your insurance information on file. The receptionist mentioned there was a flag on the billing address. Would you mind stepping out to the front desk to sort it out?" Martha hesitated. I felt her hand stiffen on mine. "Can't it wait? I don't want to leave Arthur alone." "I'm not confused, Martha," I snapped, the irritation flaring up through the exhaustion. "Go fix the billing." She patted my hand again, a little harder this time. "Okay, Artie, I'll be right back." She picked up her purse, a red leather bag I had bought her for our 40th anniversary just 3 months ago, and walked out. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut, the atmosphere in the room shifted violently. It was as if all the oxygen had been sucked out by a vacuum. Dr. Vance stood up, walked to the door, and locked it. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home echoed like a gunshot in the small room. He rolled his stool closer, invading my personal space, his knees almost touching mine. He didn't look at his clipboard anymore. He looked directly into my eyes with a terrified intensity I have never seen in a medical professional. His forehead was beaded with sweat. "Arthur," he said, lowering his voice to a friction-filled whisper that barely carried across the gap between us, "listen to me very carefully." I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Is it cancer? Just tell me." "It's not cancer," he hissed. "Your blood work didn't come back with anemia. It didn't come back with a viral infection." He took a breath, his eyes darting to the door. "It came back with thallium levels 3 times the lethal limit for a man your size. You aren't sick, Arthur." My world stopped. The humming of the overhead fluorescent lights seemed to drill into my skull. Thallium, the heavy metal, the poisoner's poison, colorless, odorless, tasteless. I tried to speak, tried to defend Martha, tried to say it was impossible. But the logic of my engineer's brain overrode my heart. The data points were there. I just hadn't been plotting them on the graph. The special protein shake she mixed only for me in the morning because I was getting frail and losing muscle mass. The way she watched me eat dinner, her eyes fixated on every swallow, not with love, but with a dark, hungry anticipation. "Arthur," I whispered, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. Dr. Vance gripped my shoulder, his fingers digging into my trapezius. "Do not eat her cooking, Arthur. Do not take a pill she hands you. Do not drink a sip of water unless you poured it yourself from the tap. I have a legal obligation to report this to the authorities, and I will. But if I call the police right now while you're sitting here, she might claim senility on your part. She might claim it was an accident, that you got into some rat poison in the garage. She's killing me," I said, the realization hitting me with the force of a wrecking ball. "You need to survive the night," Vance said urgently. "You need to get out of that house, or you need to get evidence. Can you do that?" I looked at my trembling hands. They weren't trembling from age. They were trembling because my nervous system was being systematically destroyed. A cold, hard rage began to solidify in my gut, replacing the nausea. It was the steel reinforcing the concrete. "I can do it," I said. I looked at the door. I knew she was out there, smiling at the receptionist, fixing the billing for the husband she was actively deleting from the earth. I thought about the thousands of people watching stories like this, thinking it could never happen to them. I drove home with the woman who was slowly killing me, wondering how many times I thanked her for the poison she spoon-fed me. If you believe that evil can hide behind the wedding ring, hit that subscribe button. You need to see how I survived this dinner. The door handle turned. I froze. Dr. Vance spun around, unlocked the deadbolt, and sat back on his stool, putting on a professional smile mask instantly. Martha walked in, clutching that red leather bag. She smiled, looking between us, her eyes scanning for any sign of conspiracy. "Is everything all right?" I looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time in 40 years, I didn't see my wife. I didn't see the woman I promised to cherish. I saw a stranger wearing her face. I saw a predator in a floral blouse. I managed a weak nod, forcing a lie through my dry throat, scraping it past the vocal cords she had damaged. "Just old age, Martha. Doctor says I need rest." "Oh, you poor dear," she cooed, coming to my side. "We'll get you home." The drive home was a blur of Seattle rain and paranoia. The windshield wipers slashed back and forth like a metronome counting down the minutes of my life. Every word she spoke sounded like a threat wrapped in velvet. "Are you hungry, Artie? I made your favorite stew." The nickname Artie, once a term of endearment that made me feel seen, now sounded like a curse. It sounded like the name of a pet she was preparing to put down. "That sounds nice," I said, staring out the window at the gray highway. We arrived at our home, a craftsman-style house in Queen Anne I paid off 3 years ago. It was the primary asset in a will I had recently updated at her suggestion. "Arthur, we should make sure everything is simple, just in case," she had said. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together with the violent precision of a car crash. The will. She isn't just killing me, she is liquidating me. I was just a walking bank account to her, and the withdrawal process was almost complete. That evening, the house smelled of savory beef and rosemary. It used to be the smell of home, of safety, of warmth against the cold damp of the Pacific Northwest. Now, it smelled like a funeral parlor. It smelled like thallium. I sat at the head of the table, my usual spot. Martha bustled around the kitchen humming a tune. It was disturbing how happy she seemed. She placed a steaming bowl in front of me. The steam rose, curling into the air, carrying the scent of death. My stomach twisted in knots, not from hunger, but from terror. "Eat up," she said, sitting opposite me. I looked at her place setting. It was empty. There was no bowl in front of her. "What?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though my pulse was thumping in my ears. "Oh, I'm fasting tonight," she claimed, pouring herself a glass of water. "My diet, remember? I'm trying to lose those last 5 pounds before the reunion. But you need your strength, Artie." I picked up my spoon. My hand shook, and this time I didn't try to hide it. I let the tremor happen. It sold the lie. I looked at the brown liquid, the chunks of carrot and potato, the tender beef. I prayed to God for strength, not to forgive her, but to outsmart her. I needed to be the engineer again. I needed to solve the problem of my own survival. I lifted the spoon to my lips. Martha leaned forward slightly, her eyes wide, watching. She looked like a child waiting for a jack-in-the-box to pop. I let the spoon touch my lips, but I didn't open my mouth. Instead, I dropped the spoon with a clatter, splashing stew onto the tablecloth. I grabbed my chest and launched into a coughing fit, a violent, heaving spasm that I forced from my diaphragm. "Oh," she cried, but she didn't get up to help. She just watched. "Bathroom," I choked out. I pushed myself up from the table, stumbling, playing up the weakness in my legs. I rushed to the hallway bathroom and slammed the door, locking it instantly. My heart was racing so fast I thought I might actually have a heart attack. I pulled a gallon-sized Ziploc bag from my pocket, one I had swiped from the pantry earlier while pretending to get a glass of water. I knelt by the toilet. I poured the stew from my mouth into the bag. I hadn't swallowed a drop, just held it against my teeth. Then I reached into my pocket where I had hidden a handful of napkins I'd grabbed. I soaked up the broth from my lips and spit into the bag. It wasn't enough. It needed to look like vomit. I gagged myself with my finger, forcing up a little bile to mix with the saliva, and spit that into the bag too. Then I flushed the toilet. The roar of the water masked the sound of me sealing the bag. I shoved the warm, heavy plastic bag deep into the inside pocket of my cardigan. I washed my face with cold water, staring at my reflection. My eyes looked haunted. "You are going to live," I told the old man in the mirror. "You are going to bury her, not the other way around." When I returned to the dining room, I slumped into my chair. "I'm sorry, Martha," I wheezed. She looked at the empty bowl, then at the spot of stew on the tablecloth, then at me. A slow, satisfied smile spread across her face. She thought the poison was already working. She thought I had ingested it and my body was rejecting it in its final throes. "That's okay, Artie," she said softly. "You tried. Good boy. Why don't you go up to bed? Like a dog." That night, lying in bed next to her, listening to the rhythm of her breathing, I realized the depth of my isolation. I was lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling, fully aware that the person breathing next to me wanted me to stop breathing forever. I was sleeping next to my executioner. I waited. 1 hour, 2. Her breathing deepened into the heavy rhythmic snore of deep sleep. I crept out of bed. My joints ached, screaming at the movement, but adrenaline is a powerful drug. I moved silently through the hallway, down the stairs, and out into the garage. The air was cold, biting through my thin pajamas. I went to my workbench. I moved aside a stack of old paint cans and pulled out my old steel lockbox, the one I used for sensitive client blueprints back in the day. I opened it and placed the Ziploc bag of stew inside. It sat there, an ugly brown lump of evidence. This wasn't dinner anymore. It was evidence A. I locked the box and hid it inside an old tire in the corner. Then I sat on the cold concrete floor of the garage, shivering violently. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break things. I cried, silent, heaving sobs that shook my ribs. I cried for the betrayal. I cried for the 40 years that were apparently a lie. I cried for the love I thought we had.
Then the tears stopped. The engineer took over. Structural failure identified. Mitigation strategy required. If she wants to treat me like a demolition project, she's about to learn that this foundation doesn't crack. I pulled out my phone. The screen glowed in the darkness, illuminating my face. It was 3 a.m. I dialed the one number I knew I could trust, the one man who understood war better than anyone. The phone rang 4 times. Then a groggy, gravelly voice answered. "Arthur, it's 3 in the morning." "Robert," I whispered, my voice hard as granite. "I need you to bring your camera and your gun. The hardest part of dying isn't the fear of the end. It is looking into the eyes of the person holding the knife and smiling like you don't see the blade." For the next 3 days, I became an actor on the stage of my own funeral. I had built skyscrapers that scraped the belly of the clouds and bridges that spanned raging rivers. But pretending to be a frail, oblivious old man was the most structurally demanding project of my life. I had to channel every ounce of remaining strength into the performance of weakness. I shuffled my feet when I walked, letting the rubber tip of my cane drag against the hardwood floors. I complained of dizziness every time I stood up. I let my hands shake, even when they wanted to form fists strong enough to punch a hole through the drywall. I waited until Martha left for her Charity League meeting on Thursday morning, a meeting I now suspected was just a cover for meeting with lawyers or lovers to make my move. I drove to the Home Depot on the other side of town. It was the only place I knew she wouldn't track me. She hated the smell of sawdust and lumber. I parked my sedan in the far corner of the lot, next to a beat-up Ford truck. Robert was leaning against the tailgate, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked exactly as he had in the military police 40 years ago, just grayer and harder, like a piece of granite that had weathered too many storms. I got out of the car, clutching a plastic grocery bag. "You look like hell, Artie," Robert said, pushing off the truck.
He didn't offer a handshake. He just looked me up and down with a clinical, assessing gaze. "I feel like a science experiment," I replied, my voice raspy. "Here." I handed him the bag. He took it without flinching, peering at the brown sludge inside the Ziploc. "Or?" he asked. "The main course," I said, "and the bottle is the dessert. She mixes it into my tea. I think it's arsenic, or maybe something agricultural." Robert looked at the pill bottle, turning it over in his calloused hands. His face was stone cold. There was no pity in his eyes, only a focused, lethal determination. "I'll get this to the private lab I use," he said. "Rush order. I'll have the breakdown in 24 hours. "Stay alive," he said. "Don't eat, don't drink, don't turn your back on her. If she hands you a glass of water, you pour it into a plant when she's not looking." "I can do that," I said, though I felt a wave of exhaustion hit me. "I just need to know the truth, Robert." "You will," he promised. "Go home. Be the victim." I returned home to a scene that made my blood boil in my veins. Martha was sitting at the kitchen table, but she wasn't alone. Sitting across from her with his feet propped up on one of the chairs was Gavin. Gavin was Martha's nephew, a young man of about 35 who had appeared out of nowhere 2 years ago. Martha had told me he was her estranged sister's boy, down on his luck and needing a fresh start. I had welcomed him. I had given him money to fix his car. I had let him stay in the guest room for a month. He was brash, loud, and looked at my house not as a home, but as an asset to be liquidated. They stopped talking the moment the back door opened. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with unspoken conspiracies. It hung in the air like smoke. "Uncle Arthur," Gavin said, not moving his feet from the chair. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I see that," I rasped, leaning heavily on my cane. "What brings you by, Gavin?" "Just checking in on my favorite aunt," he said, winking at Martha. We were just discussing, I asked, limping toward the sink to pour a glass of water I had no intention of drinking. Martha stood up quickly, smoothing her skirt. She looked nervous. We were talking about long-term care facilities, Artie. Just preliminary research for when... The rage flared in my chest, hot and blinding. They were planning my warehousing while I was standing right in front of them. They were discussing my expiration date. I tamped the anger down, forcing it into a tight ball in my gut. "That's thoughtful," I lied, turning to face them. Martha and Gavin exchanged a look, a quick, micro-expression of annoyance that a casual observer might have missed. But I was an engineer. I noticed the cracks in the facade. They were impatient. The poison wasn't working fast enough. I was becoming an inconvenience. "Of course you are, Uncle Arthur," Gavin said, finally dropping his feet to the floor.
But it never hurts to be prepared, especially with a memory like yours. Some things are hard to forget, I said, staring him down until he looked away. The next day, Robert called. We met at a park bench near the waterfront, watching the ferries cut through the gray water of the Puget Sound. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He handed me a thick manila envelope. "Read it," he said. I opened the clasp. The first page was the toxicology report. "Thallium in the stew," Robert narrated as I scanned the chemical spikes on the chart. "High concentrations. It causes hair loss, nerve damage, organ failure. It's painful and slow. The pills? Arsenic." I felt sick, but I kept reading. The next document was a background check on Gavin. I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. "He isn't her nephew, Arthur," Robert said softly. I looked up, the wind knocked out of me. "She was married before you, 1978, a quick thing in Nevada. She had a kid, gave him up to her mother to raise, and never told you. Gavin isn't a long-lost nephew." Robert pointed to the third page. "He owes $200,000 to some very bad people in Vegas. That's why he showed up 2 years ago. That's why he needs money." The betrayal deepened, cracking the foundation of my entire life. She wasn't just killing me for greed. She was killing me to clean up the mess of a secret life she had kept hidden for 4 decades. She was sacrificing me to save the son she had lied about since the day we met. "She played me," I whispered. "She played the long game," Robert agreed. "Now we play the end game." I went home. I didn't confront her, not yet. I told her I wanted to have a special dinner on Sunday night. I insisted on ordering in from our favorite Italian place, Luigi's. I claimed I didn't want her to work over a hot stove when she had been taking such good care of me. She agreed, suspicion flickering in her eyes. "Are you sure, Artie?" "I want it," I said firmly, "and invite Gavin." She smiled then, a genuine smile. She thought I was making it easy for her. She thought she could get one last family memory before the end. "Perfect," she said. Sunday night arrived. The dining room was set with the good china, the plates we usually saved for Thanksgiving. The air was tense, vibrating with the energy of a storm about to break. I sat at the head of the table. Martha sat to my right, Gavin to my left. The takeout containers were in the kitchen, plated by me, watched like a hawk to ensure no extra spices were added. Gavin was pouring wine, a bottle he had brought. I covered my glass with my hand. "Not tonight," I said. "Suit yourself, old man," muttered, pouring himself a generous glass. Martha looked radiant. She was wearing the pearl necklace I bought her 10 years ago. It felt like a desecration. "It's so nice to see you sitting up, Arthur," she said. "You look—" "I feel stronger," I said. Gavin asked, tearing a piece of bread. Before anyone could take a bite, I stood up. I didn't use the table for leverage. I didn't reach for my cane, which was propped against the sideboard. I stood straight, my spine locking into place, my shoulders rolling back.
The tremors in my hands were gone, replaced by the steady calm of a man who has checked the calculations and knows the bridge will hold. "Before we eat," I said, my voice steady and booming for the first time in months. It echoed off the walls. "I have a gift for you, Martha." They both froze. Gavin's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Martha's smile faltered. I reached under the table where I had taped the manila envelope. I pulled it free with a rip of adhesive tape. I tossed it onto the center of the table. It slid across the polished wood, spinning slightly, and stopped right in front of Martha's plate. "Open it," I commanded. She laughed nervously, looking at Gavin, then back at me. "Arthur, what is this? You're acting strange." "Open." The command left no room for argument. It was the voice I used on construction sites when lives were at risk. Her hands shook as she reached out. She undid the clasp, her fingers fumbling. She pulled out the toxicology report first. Her eyes scanned the page, and I watched the blood drain from her face. She turned a sickly shade of gray, the color of wet cement. She looked at the chemical breakdown of the stew. Then she saw the second document, Gavin's birth certificate, listing her as the mother. She dropped the papers as if they were burning her skin. "I know," I said, turning my gaze to Gavin. He was staring at the birth certificate, his mouth slightly open. "I know about the gambling debts, Gavin. I know about the $200,000 you owe. I know about the thallium in my stew and the arsenic in my tea." Gavin stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. His face twisted into a snarl. "This is crazy, old man. You're senile." He took a step toward me, his fists clenching. "Sit down, son," a voice boomed from the hallway. Robert stepped out from the kitchen shadows where he had been waiting for the last hour. He wasn't holding a gun, but he was holding up his phone, the red light glowing steady. He was recording. "Gavin!" shouted, looking between me and the intruder. "The man who just live-streamed your confession to the Seattle Police Department," Robert said calmly. Behind Robert, the front door opened. Two uniformed officers stepped into the light of the dining room chandelier, their hands resting on their belts. "Police," one of them announced. The energy in the room collapsed. Gavin looked at the back door, measuring the distance, but he saw the defeat in Martha's eyes and stopped. Martha didn't scream, she didn't cry. She slumped in her chair, the mask of the loving wife dissolving instantly. What remained was a tired, defeated woman caught in her own trap. She looked down at the food on her plate. Food she didn't cook, food she couldn't poison. I asked. It was the only word that mattered, the only variable in the equation I couldn't solve. She looked up at me. Her eyes were dead. "Because you were taking too long to die, Arthur," she whispered, her voice void of emotion. "We tried to be gentle. We tried to make it look natural. But the interest on the debt was piling up." The cruelty of it took my breath away. "Arthur?" I repeated. The police moved in. They handcuffed Gavin first. He was shouting obscenities, blaming his mother, blaming me, blaming the world for his failures. They dragged him out, kicking and screaming. Then an officer gently pulled Martha from her chair. She stood passively. As they clicked the handcuffs around her wrists, wrists I had held, wrists I had kissed, she looked at me one last time. Her eyes pleaded for a mercy she didn't earn. "Arthur, please," she whimpered. "I'm sick. I didn't mean it. It was the stress." "You are sick," I agreed, watching them lead her away past the table set for a celebration. The front door closed. The sirens wailed outside, fading into the rainy Seattle night. The silence rushed back into the house, filling the void they left behind. Robert walked over and put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "It's done, Artie." "Yeah," I breathed. The house was empty. My marriage was a crime scene. The woman I loved was a ghost who had haunted me for 40 years. But as I looked at the untouched plates of food, I took a deep breath. The air didn't smell like rosemary or deception anymore. It smelled clean. I walked to the sideboard and picked up the pitcher of water. I poured myself a tall glass. I watched the clear liquid swirl, catching the light. I raised it to my lips. My hand was steady. I took a long, slow drink. It tasted like freedom.